give you a nice little talk and explain the difference between a few veg and concentrate on one variety which I absolutely love, which is heritage vegetables. How did our vegetables come around? How have we got so many different varieties now, and where have they come from? If you go back a few years, quite a few years, I don't think many of you remember it, my friend Karen might remember it, but back to caveman days, what happens is we have no shops. We have nowhere to go and buy our food from, so we forage for them. And if we find things we like, they're things that we want to eat more of, they're things we go back to the same place for. So just like us, when we find something we like in Tesco, we go back every week, we buy the same thing. Most of that is because of taste. We select things because we like the taste. So if you don't like the taste, this is a bitter gourd, which most people don't really like eating. If it's something we don't like because it's either too bitter, it's too tough, it's too fibrous, anything like that at all, we don't like them, we don't come back to them. And these vegetables eventually just, they're not developed. They stay the wild forms, or they're not cared for as well. On the opposite side of that, you've got things that we do like. So most of us eat carrots, most of us eat potatoes. They're all things that we like for a reason. They're good for us, we can grow them easy. So we go back to them, and that's what our forefathers and people used to do years ago. Then, if we bring it back, if we come forward in time a few hundred years, we go to, let's take an example of America. When we first went over on the Mayflower to America, we only travelled as fast as our feet, or the donkey or the mule that was actually dragging the cart, or we were riding at the time. But again, we went over there. We can't really picture it now, but we went over there. There were no shops. There was nothing. There was absolutely no infrastructure. So to get from one side on the East Coast to the West Coast, where California is, could take absolutely years for people to go. Now, there's nowhere to buy anything from, so we take our own food with us in the form of seeds or plants. So don't forget, you've got no cars, so you can't pop anywhere to fetch it. You can't even go to the garden centre. There's nothing. There's no trains, there's no planes. Absolutely nothing at all. So you are travelling with your plants as fast as your feet. Now, if you carry on growing and you're moving at the same time, you're quite nomadic trying to get somewhere, what happens is the plants are grown and then you move on before those plants are harvested. So those plants then have to survive for themselves. They either die off, or they crossbreed, or they stay true, and they naturalise in the environment they're actually in. So it becomes a different species. We may have things that start in Eastern Europe as one variety, that work their way over Europe over hundreds of years, and they become different varieties of vegetable. They will like different types of soil, because that's where they've been grown or where they've been left. And if you try and grow something and it survives, it will slightly change over time. So that goes on to what is a heritage vegetable. That's probably the biggest question that I'm asked all the time. What is a heritage vegetable? There are three things that class as heritage. It's got to be open pollinated, which means when it flowers, either bugs, bees, insects have got to pollinate it, or in the case of corn, the wind pollinates it by moving the pollen around from one plant to another. The next thing it has to be is true to form. That just means if you grow a small red tomato, you pick it, you plant the seed from that tomato, it grows again, it will create a small red tomato, exactly the same. So it's not a modern F1 variety, which is made by man. We crossbreed them for the purpose we want, but if you plant the seeds from that variety, it will revert back to its parents or its grandparents, and it will be a different plant that grows from seed. This is the main point now. Point three, a heritage vegetable has to have a bit of history. There's got to be a story, there's got to be something about it. If you go to America, or if you've got any American friends, or you go on the internet looking for rare types of vegetables, or old types of vegetables, you'll find heirloom vegetables. Heirloom vegetables are the first two. They're open pollinated and they're true to form. But they could have been bred by people 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year. There's no history. So when we're talking about heritage vegetables, we're talking about things that are a minimum of 50 years old and normally pre-World War II. So we're talking things our grandparents, our great-grandparents and before used to grow. So these are things that have stood the test of time. They've been grown for a reason, they've been saved for a reason, and they're still here for a reason. It's because they liked it and we like it. It's not a modern variety, it's not something that we've bred for a fad or for a reason. So, examples of these different vegetables. This is a currant tomato. If you look on the left-hand side, that's a red currant. If you look on the right-hand side, that's my hand with the tomatoes, which are called red currant tomatoes. It was discovered on a beach in 1707 in Peru. So it was growing in the sand, sprawling along the floor, coping with the salt air absolutely fine. You can see the size where, if I can go back, oh, hang on, let's start again. When it comes up in this corner, 3 of the cherry tomatoes, the currant tomatoes, actually fit on a 2-pence piece, and they're fully grown and fully ripe. That's how small, it'll just go on, that's how small they are. They're really, really good, resistant to most diseases, resistant and tolerant to very cold temperatures for a tomato, and it's not a normal garden tomato. This is the only time you'll ever hear me say a Latin name or a scientific name for any plant, just because the reason I like it. It's called the Solanum pimpernifolium, which basically is a totally different species to a normal garden tomato. So it is the world's first tomato that was discovered. It's really sweet, it's got a nice tartness to the end of it. It's absolutely amazing if you've got kids, you can dry them in the oven, and they are, because they're that size, they dry into raisins. So they are the world's smallest sun-dried tomato, and they're perfect for kids. They're really good if you stick them in a jam jar with some oil. They turn into sun-blushed tomatoes, so you can use it all the way through the year. And the absolute best bit is they come in bright yellow as well. So they look brilliant when they're dried and mixed together. Either toss them through a salad, give them to the kids, or just picking them from the plant. They're really, really nice. This is beetroot. It looks like a turnip, but it's not. It's actually beetroot. It's a white beetroot called Albina veriduna. And the chains at the side, because this is a bit of a QI fact, this is when Stephen Fry comes jumping onto the stage to tell me all about it. Basically, this little beetroot helped end slavery in the Caribbean. It's a really, really tenuous link, but it's a really interesting story, and it's the part of the history and the heritage of this variety. In the 1700s, we were fighting over one thing. Europe had just discovered sugar and sugar canes. You'll know if you've ever tried to grow it. A, you can't get hold of it. B, it would never grow here. It will never grow hardly anywhere in Europe. So we found out that it grew in the Caribbean. Sugar cane grows really well in the Caribbean. The Caribbean was populated by hardly any people. Back then in the 1700s, we had no planes, we had nothing really motorised, we had sail ships. So it was between Portugal, Spain, France, England, and a little bit to do with Holland as well. They actually started plantations in the Caribbean, so St. Lucia, Barbados, Antigua, and they were stopped and used slaves as their workforce. So there was no minimum wage. Mr. Osborne wasn't involved, nothing happened whatsoever. It was only slaves that grew the sugar cane. And there were wars over this. Thousands of lives were lost because we would pirate someone else's ship that was full of sugar cane, or the sugar cones that they used to actually make at the time. And it became the in thing to do. We'd never had sugar before. Everybody wanted it, from the kings, the queens, to the dukes. And it was a very clever Frenchman that found out that a certain crop, this is called a fodder beet, is related to a beetroot, and they grow massive. If you Google them online, there's a guy who's grown one, it's probably about this big, and that's the actual beet, and then the leaves on top. They're huge, and they're used years ago to feed cattle, so they could dry them, and they could keep them through the winter to feed their cattle when there was no grass. He discovered that they were very, very, very slightly sweet, and decided that instead of going all the way to the Caribbean, which took months, and all the way back, which took months, to get pirated, to get sunk, and to get just a little bit of sugar back, he could crossbreed that with a beetroot, and he did. And it was bright pink, because he used a red beetroot. And at the time, all the beetroots they had were mainly the tapered ones, the longer ones, not the flat round ones we have now. So he crossed it with that one, and nobody liked it. So it took a few more years. What happened then is they found Albina veriduna, which is a lovely, really natural, sweet beetroot. If you heard James earlier, it's the sweetest of the beetroots that we have. It doesn't have any dye to it, so when they crossbred them, they came out with this, which is a sugar beet. Now, sugar beet, you'll know in certain parts of the country, it grows everywhere. You can go down to any shop, any local shop, and you can buy British grown sugar. It's not sugar cane, it's sugar beet. So a few years later, they then had the sugar beet plantations in France where they started to process this and make their own sugar. And because they could make their own sugar in France, suddenly Spain was doing it, suddenly England was doing it, all of Europe was making their own. And there was no need for all the hassle that it took and the time and the effort and the expense to get sugar cane. So what happened is the demand plummeted, most of the sugar plantations were dissolved. Well, what they did with all the slaves is they wouldn't take them back to where they come from, so they just freed them. So then the slaves were freed on the sugar plantations. We had this, and that's how, in a roundabout way, this tiny little beetroot helped end slavery in the Caribbean, because if they'd not discovered this, nobody wanted pink sugar or red sugar. It had to be white, it had to look like sugarcane sugar, and that's how it helped. Like I said, it's really sweet. It's a bit smaller than a normal beetroot, it doesn't have that earthy taste, and there's no dye to it at all, there's no stain in it. So if you drop it down your lovely white dress as you're out for a meal, it'll just bounce off, that's it, there's no staining. So it's brilliant for kids, it's brilliant for the little kids that have their hands in everything that suddenly look like a little axe murderer when they finish their meal, because there is no dye, there's no stain on it at all. Honey boat is the next one. This is a squash that I discovered in Pasadena, which is just outside LA a couple of years ago. It's actually from Italy, and these are a couple of ideas that you can grow with them. It probably grows, each squash, about the size of this bottle. So it's a nice, manageable size. It's not a big squash, it's not a big pumpkin. So one of these chopped in half is ideal for two people, let's say. The unique things about this squash are the fact it's got the same texture as a sweet potato. So if you like sweet potato, you'll like this. It's not fibrous, it doesn't go quite dry like some squash can or some pumpkins can when you grow them and they almost suck the moisture out your mouth. This is nice, this is quite moist, shall we say. Also, one of the good points about it is normally you peel a pumpkin, you peel a squash. This one you don't. If you roast it, the skin's edible. So it goes like when you when you make a jacket potato in the oven, not the microwave, but in the oven, you know, you get that nice, chewy, quite hard but chewy and tasty skin. That's exactly the same that this does as well. And this in the corner is not advertising anyone, but a nice little Nigella Lawson recipe when she makes it's a spiced squash cake, and she puts quite a lot of sugar in there. But because this is sweet, this squash is sweeter than a butternut squash, and it's also sweeter and smaller than a Crown Prince, you don't need as much sugar. So if you're wanting to cook with it, like you would a carrot cake, it's just a squash cake, it's virtually the same thing, but there's not as much sugar in it. It will climb. I know there was a lady who I was talking to earlier, if you've got a gate or if you've got posts for it to grow up, it will climb if you leave it to climb, and because they're only small fruit, they won't rip the actual structure down, and you don't need a degree in engineering to get the concrete and everything else out to make something that can support it. This is a German pea called a Blauschocker, which originally in Germany, this was grown for the flowers because they look like sweet peas. They have really long stems, absolutely beautiful, like a mauvey purple. They go to almost a cream colour as they fade and they get older, but this was grown as an actual cut flower. Looks great in your border, looks amazing in a mixed bed, but the idea behind it is that you get the lovely flowers from it. You can pick some, but leave the pods. You know on a sweet pea how they come, the little furry pods, they start to curve like a half moon. This is exactly the same, but it's a mange too. It's a dark, dark purple mange too. And then as it matures, it has these lovely creamy green peas inside that are really, really intensely sweet. And for a heritage older type of pea, it's quite rare for a pea not to be quite starchy or quite hard or quite just savoury, not sweet. Whereas this one is really sweet. So it's a nice thing to grow because it looks attractive as well. And a couple of those in between your sweet peas. You've got the scent from the sweet peas, you've got the flowers from this. They look absolutely amazing. Oh, and going back to that pea actually as well, before we go on to long scarlet, you blitz that up with some feta cheese, some garlic, olive oil, it makes the most amazing pea hummus. It really is lovely. So have a go with that, it's gorgeous. Long scarlet. This vegetable was discovered by the Heritage Seed Library, which is a charity just outside Coventry, who the patron is Prince Charles, and I've been a seed guardian for them for a few years now, and they have the really rare heritage vegetables. We discovered this growing in a very, very famous author's garden who is in the National Trust. We then did a bit of digging, and we found out that this author, who's a children's author, I'll not give you any clues yet, a children's author, has written lots and lots of books and has misled millions of children their entire life. And most adults won't have known it either. This is long scarlet. This is a carrot. Long scarlet is not a carrot, it's a radish. If you look at the foliage at the top, a carrot has ferny, really fluffy foliage, it's very light. If you look at the foliage on long scarlet, it's related to a turnip. A radish is related to a turnip. So it has the same type of leaves. They're totally different. They're also edible, the leaves on the long scarlet, on the radish. Very nice radish, very peppery, very nice, can be cooked with, you can stir fry it, use it like a carrot, say in a stew or a casserole. But does anyone have any ideas who, no one that was here yesterday, but who may have misled anyone on this?
Beatrix Potter.
There you go. Beatrix Potter. Peter Rabbit never, in any book that Beatrix Potter wrote, ever ate a carrot. He only ever ate long scarlet radish. If you don't believe me, if you have a smartphone, I've checked, we have a signal. Go on to Google now. Someone, the first one to do this, show everyone. Go on to Google, Google Peter Rabbit, click on images. You will never ever see a carrot in Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit's hand. It will be that picture, or you'll see the same foliage. So this was discovered, like I said, by the Heritage Seed Library in Beatrix Potter's garden, which is one of the National Trust properties. And we've been able to stock these up, find these seeds, and actually be the first company to bring them back to the main market for you guys to go home and grow. And it's a brilliant story this time of year. So actually, if you've got the books at home, or you've got kids at home that have got the books, grow these. 8 to 10 weeks, you've got fully grown radish. They're amazing, they're really tasty. The kids won't believe you that they're not a carrot. Most people don't. It's only until the picture comes up. But we did this to try and get people interested in gardening, try and get the link. It's the history, it's the heritage of what we grow. And this year it's the 150th anniversary of Beatrix Potter's birth. So that's why we've decided with Kitchen Garden, which are just next year, if you buy the next issue, you can be in with a chance of winning a pack of these seeds. So all you've got to do, fill in the little form, send it back to them or online, and we've got 1,000 packs to give away to you guys. Alternatively, I know from yesterday we don't have many left. They also have it on the stand if you want to have a go. But it's a brilliant, really, really good radish. Now, the story of heritage doesn't end there. Where we are now, we've got to a stage where science has taken over our gardening in good and in not so good reasons, but grafting is a really great process to get the most out of the vegetables you want. It's nothing to do with GMO, it's nothing to do with GM, it's nothing to do with Frankenstein food. It's been used for hundreds of years on apple trees. If you ever grew a small tree that says on the sticker, it can grow in your garden, it can grow in a container, it's a grafted plant. Go home if you've got one, look towards the bottom of the plant and you'll see this big knobble, which is the grafting union from the roots that give the plant the habit you want, and then the plant on the top, which gives you the fruit that you want. Now, what's been discovered is that it works for vegetables as well. It used to be very expensive because it's an annual thing. Most vegetables are annuals, so it's fine to do that for an apple tree because it's around for a few years. But what's the benefits to do it for a vegetable that's only here for a year? You take your vegetable, you take your rootstock, you'll probably be able to see it here. That is just a tiny little clip. In between is a cut. Every cut is made by hand, by a human, with a razor. So you get two plants, chop one off at the bottom, chop one off a bit further up, and they just touch them together, put the clip on. There's no glue, there's no spray, it's just nature wanting to survive, and they knit themselves together. The bonus to this is that when you actually use a grafted plant, Because you've got the rootstock that's more vigorous, because you've got the rootstock that's more cold tolerant, you get up to 75% more produce from a plant than you would if you grew it from seed. So if you've got a small space, it's ideal. It saves you planting 2 plants, just put 1 in. It also makes it more disease resistant, and it makes it more cold tolerant. So when we come to things like the tomatoes, the little currant tomatoes, they're great on their own. They're great in a greenhouse. They'd be brilliant on a patio by a sunny wall. But if you take a grafted version of that, you'll get nearly twice as many tomatoes, and also it can cope with just about anything you throw at it, because it's got that super rootstock that can survive anything, but you've got what you want on the top. The same thing's been done for pumpkins and squash. The honey boat's exactly the same. A honey boat from seed will probably produce about 10 or 11 squash this size. You'll probably get 17, 18 from one that's grafted, and it will climb a lot better, it will spread a lot better. So all you've got to do is, if you want it to spread, snip the growing point off, and it will cover everything. So for me, it's perfect. It's the lazy gardener's plant, because the leaves are that big, stops the weeds growing, and because it's grafted, it grows really quick. They're supercharged, these things, because the rootstock really do help do that. All these grafted plants, you'll be able to have a look at over there. They'll be able to help you with. Also, Wyvale Garden Centres are now going to be stocking these plants as well, the heritage side of it, because they've discovered that we want the taste that we used to have. So I remember going to my granddad's when I was a kid. We'd go and pick something from the garden, and we'd eat it, and we'd pick a carrot, and it tasted like a carrot. I go to Tesco's now and buy a bag of carrots, and I eat it, and I think, that was a nice orange stick. Because it's got no taste. You know what it's like. We're all here because we grow our own things. We grow our own things for a multitude of different reasons, but it's about the taste. And the older varieties that are still around, they are around for a reason, and that is why. We need to keep the heritage vegetables, but go to the next step and actually just enjoy growing, but enjoy growing in a different way, a different method. So that's my little speech on Heritage Veg. What I'm going to do now is there are some pictures on the back of the other range, cut flowers, things like that. Please have a look. But if anyone's got any questions, please just let me know, and I'll come down and answer your questions. So thank you very much for your time, and really do enjoy the show. Thank you.